My dad traded me for drug money. Then he needed a kidney and I was his only match. I was 11 years old when my father looked at me across a kitchen table covered in empty beer cans and said, "Pack your things. You're going to live with Ray for a while." Ray was his dealer, a man with yellowed teeth and hands that shook unless he'd just gotten high. I'd met him twice before, both times when my dad needed me to wait in the car while they handled business in parking lots behind abandoned buildings. I asked how long a while meant. My dad didn't look at me when he answered. As long as it takes to clear my debt. I was 11. I didn't understand that he was trading me like currency, that Ray had agreed to forgive $3,000 in unpaid drug money in exchange for free labor from a kid who could clean, cook, and keep his mouth shut. I just knew my father was sending me away, and the look in his eyes told me arguing would make things worse. I'm Theo Brennan, and this is the story of how my father sold me to his dealer, and years later, ended up in my hospital room begging me to save his life with my kidney. Ray's house smelled like chemicals and rotting food. The windows were covered with aluminum foil and garbage bags. There were 3 other people living there, all men who looked at me with either indifference or something that made my skin crawl. Ray showed me to a basement room with a mattress on the floor and a lock on the outside of the door. "This is yours. You'll clean the house, do the dishes, take out trash. You cook, you're useful, we don't have problems. You cause problems, you don't eat." I nodded, already learning that speaking only made things worse. That first night, I heard people coming and going upstairs, voices raised in argument, then laughter, then silence. I lay on the mattress staring at the ceiling and tried to remember what my mother looked like. She died when I was 6 from an overdose. My memories of her were already fading, replaced by years of my father's decline into the same addiction that killed her. I started working the next morning. Dishes piled in the sink, some with food that had been there so long it was growing mold. The living room was covered in cigarette burns and stains I didn't want to identify. I cleaned for 6 hours before Ray came down and inspected my work. He nodded and threw a granola bar at me. "Good. Keep it up." Days blurred together. I'd wake up when I heard movement upstairs, usually around noon. I'd clean whatever mess had been made the night before. Sometimes Ray would give me money to walk to the corner store for cigarettes or instant noodles. Sometimes he'd forget to feed me and I'd eat whatever I could find. After 2 weeks, I asked Ray when I could go home. He laughed and said, "Your dad owes me another grand. You're here until he pays up or you're 18, whichever comes first." I was 11. 18 felt impossible, like a distance I couldn't measure. School was still required, so Ray drove me every morning and picked me up every afternoon. I told teachers I lived with my uncle. They didn't ask questions. I was a quiet kid with decent grades who never caused trouble. I blended in. At Ray's house, I learned to be invisible. I figured out which floorboards creaked. I memorized everyone's schedules. I knew when to stay in my basement room and when it was safe to move through the house. Some of Ray's friends scared me more than others. There was a man named Vincent who would stare at me too long and ask Ray why he kept a kid around. Ray would say I was earning his keep, and Vincent would laugh in a way that made my stomach hurt. I started sleeping with my door blocked by the broken dresser in my room. It wouldn't stop someone determined, but it might buy me seconds to wake up. 3 months in, my father showed up. He came to the door, looking worse than I remembered. Thinner, with sores on his face, and that hollow look in his eyes that meant he needed his next fix badly. He asked Ray if he could see me. Ray called me upstairs. My father looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. I'd grown in 3 months, gotten taller, lost weight I didn't have to lose. He asked if I was okay. I said yes, because what else could I say? He handed Ray $200 and said it was all he had. Ray counted it and said my dad still owed $800. My father looked at me again, then left without saying goodbye. I went back to my basement room and cried for the first time since arriving. I was at Ray's house for 8 months total. In that time, I learned to cook with whatever ingredients were available. I learned to forge my father's signature on school forms. I learned to sleep lightly and wake at any unusual sound. I learned that some adults would hurt you and others would just watch. The breaking point came on a Saturday in March. Ray was having a party, which meant the house was full of people getting high and drunk. I stayed in my basement room with the dresser against the door. Around midnight, someone tried to open it. Then someone started kicking it. Vincent's voice slurred through the wood, saying Ray wouldn't mind if he borrowed me for a bit. I shoved my entire body against the dresser. The door cracked but held. Vincent kept kicking and laughing. Then I heard Ray's voice, angry, telling Vincent to back off. "Kid's off limits. He works for me, not for you," Vincent argued, but eventually left. Ray didn't check on me. The next morning, I waited until everyone was asleep or gone. Then I took $40 from Ray's wallet, packed my school backpack with the few clothes I had, and ran. I walked for 3 hours before I found a police station. I went inside and told the officer at the desk that I'd been living with my father's drug dealer and I needed help. The officer's expression changed immediately. She brought me to a private room, gave me water and a granola bar, and called Child Protective Services. A social worker named Patricia Okonkwo arrived an hour later. She had kind eyes and a voice that didn't talk down to me. She asked me to explain everything from the beginning. I told her about my father trading me to Ray for drug debt, about living in the basement, about cleaning and cooking, about Vincent trying to break down my door. She took notes and asked clarifying questions, without making me feel like I was being interrogated. Then she asked if I wanted to go back to my father. I said no. She nodded, like she'd expected that answer. "We're going to find you somewhere safe," she said. "But I need you to understand that what happened to you wasn't okay. Adults failed you. We're going to do better." I wanted to believe her. But I'd learned not to trust adults who made promises. CPS placed me in emergency foster care that night with a couple named Donald and Ruth Kavanaugh. They were in their 50s, had raised 3 kids of their own, and had been fostering for a decade. Their home was clean and quiet. They had rules posted on the refrigerator about chores and curfews. Ruth showed me to a bedroom with actual furniture and a door that locked from the inside. She said I could lock it whenever I wanted, that this was my space. I stared at that interior lock for a long time before I believed it was real. Dinner that night was overwhelming. Actual home-cooked food at a table with placemats and napkins. Donald asked about my day and actually listened to my one-word answers. Ruth told me I didn't have to talk if I didn't want to, that they understood I needed time to adjust. After dinner, Ruth gave me a bag of toiletries and new clothes still with tags on them. She said tomorrow we'd go shopping for anything else I needed. I took the longest shower of my life and slept in an actual bed with clean sheets. I woke up 3 times convinced I was back in Ray's basement before remembering where I was. The police arrested Ray and several others at his house within a week. They found drugs, weapons, and evidence of other crimes. Patricia told me Ray would be going to prison for a long time. She said I might have to testify eventually. I said, okay. They found my father living in a tent under a highway overpass. He was arrested for child endangerment and trafficking. Patricia explained that trading your child to settle drug debt counted as human trafficking under state law. My father pleaded guilty as part of a deal. He got 3 years in prison and was required to terminate his parental rights. He signed the papers without fighting it. The Kavanaughs asked if I wanted to be adopted. It had been 6 months since I'd come to live with them. 6 months of regular meals, clean clothes, therapy appointments, and slowly learning to trust again. I said yes before I could overthink it. The adoption was finalized a year later. I was 13 and legally had parents who chose me instead of drugs. School became my escape and my ambition. I'd missed a lot during my time at Ray's house and had to work twice as hard to catch up. My teachers noticed my dedication. One of them, Mr. Osei, pulled me aside and asked if I'd ever thought about college. I told him my family couldn't afford it. He said there were scholarships and programs for kids in situations like mine. He helped me research options and plan ahead. I decided I wanted to be a doctor, partially because Mr. Osei suggested it as a stable career, but mostly because I'd seen what addiction did to bodies and families, and I wanted to be someone who helped instead of hurt. The Kavanaughs supported my goals completely. Ruth helped me study for tests. Donald taught me to drive and showed me how to fill out college applications. They treated my dreams like they were achievable instead of impossible. High school was a blur of AP classes, volunteer work at the local hospital, and test prep. I graduated 3rd in my class with a full scholarship to State University for pre-med. The Kavanaughs cried at my graduation. Ruth kept saying she was so proud, and Donald kept squeezing my shoulder like he was making sure I was real. My father was released from prison during my freshman year of college. I found out through Patricia, who still checked in on me occasionally. She said he'd completed a treatment program in prison and was living in a halfway house. He'd asked about me. I told Patricia I didn't want contact. She said that was my right, and she'd make sure he understood. I threw myself into college with the same intensity I'd brought to high school. Pre-med was brutal. Organic chemistry nearly broke me. Anatomy required memorization that made my eyes blur, but I'd survived worse than difficult classes. I studied while other students partied. I worked part-time at the hospital as an aide to get experience and help with expenses the scholarship didn't cover. I learned to draw blood, take vitals, and talk to scared patients. One of the nurses, Grace Wellington, took me under her wing. She'd been doing this for 20 years and had seen everything. She taught me that being a good doctor wasn't just about knowing medicine. It was about seeing people's humanity when they were at their most vulnerable. I got into medical school on my first application. Full scholarship again, this time to a solid state program. The Kavanaughs threw me a party. Their biological children came, along with other foster kids they'd helped over the years. It felt like having a real family for the first time in my life. Medical school was everything I'd heard and worse. The workload was crushing. The competition was intense. I had classmates who'd grown up with doctor parents, who'd been groomed for this since birth. I was the kid who'd lived in a drug dealer's basement, but that kid had learned to survive, and survival skills translated into medical school better than privilege did. I could function on no sleep. I could stay calm in chaos. I could see people at their worst and still show up the next day. 3rd-year rotations were when I found my calling. Surgery, specifically transplant surgery. The precision, the stakes, the idea of giving someone a second chance at life, it resonated with something deep in me. Everyone deserves a second chance, even if my father never took his. I busted my ass to get into a surgical residency, worked extra rotations, published research, made sure every attending knew my name for the right reasons, I matched at a prestigious program for general surgery with a transplant fellowship track. The Kavanaughs came to my white coat ceremony. Ruth cried again. Donald told me he'd always known I'd make it, that I had something special. Residency was hell, 100-hour weeks, surgeries that lasted all day, attendings who screamed if you made the smallest mistake, patients who died despite perfect technique. I lost weight I didn't have to lose, developed an ulcer from stress, and barely remembered what sleep felt like. But I was becoming a surgeon, learning to hold a scalpel steady, learning to make decisions with incomplete information, learning to separate emotion from necessity when someone's life was in your hands. Grace, the nurse who'd mentored me in college, had moved to the same hospital. She'd check on me during brutal shifts, make sure I ate something, remind me why I was doing this. She said I had a gift for talking to patients, for making them feel seen even when they were terrified. By my 4th year of residency, I was good. By my 5th year, I was excellent. Attendings requested me for complex cases. I could operate for hours without my hands shaking. I could tell families their loved one didn't make it and hold space for their grief without falling apart myself. I was chief resident my final year, managing other residents and coordinating with attendings. It was the most responsibility I'd ever had, and I thrived under the pressure. After residency, I got accepted into a transplant surgery fellowship. 2 more years of training, but I'd be learning from the best in the country. Learning to harvest organs, perform transplants, manage rejection, give people their lives back. I was 30 years old and finally becoming the person I'd promised myself I'd be when I was 11 years old cleaning a drug dealer's house. The Kavanaughs came to my fellowship acceptance dinner. They were older now, Ruth's hair completely gray, Donald moving slower, but they were still proud, still showing up, still being the parents my biological father never was. 6 months into my fellowship, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Theo? It's your father. I hadn't heard his voice in nearly 20 years. It sounded older, rougher, but unmistakably him. How did you get this number? Patricia gave it to me. I've been clean for 5 years, working a regular job, going to meetings. I wanted to reach out, see if maybe we could talk. No, please. I know I messed up. I know I failed you in every possible way, but I'm different now. I've changed. I just want a chance to... I hung up. My hands were shaking. All those years of therapy, of building a life separate from him, and hearing his voice brought everything back. The basement room, the chemical smell, Vincent kicking my door. I blocked the number and tried to forget the call happened. He tried again, 2 months later, this time showing up at the hospital. Security called me down to the lobby where a man was insisting he needed to see Dr. Brennan. It was him, older, thinner, with gray hair and a face marked by years of hard living. But his eyes were clearer than I remembered, not the hollow, desperate look of someone chasing their next high. Theo, please, just give me 5 minutes. You don't get to show up at my workplace. You don't get to ask me for anything. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of it, for choosing drugs over you, for trading you to Ray, for failing as a father in every way that mattered. People in the lobby were staring. This wasn't the place for this conversation, but I was too angry to care. You sold me. You traded your own kid to your dealer like I was an object. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I do. I've spent 5 years sober thinking about it every single day. I can't undo it. I can't make it right. But I need you to know I see how badly I failed you, and I'm sorry. Your apology doesn't change anything. It doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't give me back those 8 months. It doesn't erase the nightmares I still have. He nodded, tears running down his face. I know. I just needed to say it in person. I won't bother you again. He turned to leave. I should have let him go. Should have watched him walk out and never thought about him again. But something in me, some need for him to understand the full impact, made me speak. I'm a transplant surgeon now. I save people's lives. I give them second chances. And every time I do, I think about how you didn't deserve yours. He stopped, but didn't turn around. Then he left, and I went back to work shaking with adrenaline and unprocessed rage. I told my therapist about both encounters. She asked how I felt. I said angry, violated that he'd found me, frustrated that his apology didn't fix anything. She asked if there was any part of me that wanted a relationship with him. I said no. She said that was valid, but to be prepared for complicated feelings if he kept trying. He didn't contact me again for a year. In that time, I finished my fellowship and got hired as an attending transplant surgeon at the same hospital. I was 32 years old and had achieved everything I'd dreamed about when I was a kid studying at Ray's kitchen table. I had my own apartment, my own life, and a career saving people. Then I got a call from a hospital across town. They had a patient in kidney failure who'd been added to the transplant list. During routine testing, they'd discovered I was registered as next of kin in the state medical database. The patient was my father. I told them there must be a mistake. They said my father had listed me as emergency contact years ago and never updated it. He was in end-stage renal failure, likely from years of drug use. He needed a transplant, and his position on the list wasn't good. Did I want to be contacted about his care? I said no. They said they understood, but that if I was willing to be tested as a potential living donor, It could save his life. Living donors moved patients up the list significantly. I laughed. Actually laughed at the audacity. No, absolutely not. The coordinator said she understood, that it was my choice, and she'd remove me from his contact information. I hung up and tried to go back to work, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The universe had a sick sense of humor. My father needed a kidney, and I was literally a kidney transplant surgeon. Grace found me in the break room, staring at nothing. She asked what was wrong. I told her everything. About Ray, about my father, about the call. She sat down next to me and didn't say anything for a long time. Then, what do you want to do? Nothing. He doesn't deserve my help. That's valid. But is that what you want, or what you think you should want? I didn't have an answer. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. My father was dying. A kidney transplant would save him. I was a match, blood type and tissue typing both compatible, according to the preliminary screening. I could save his life, the same life he'd thrown away choosing drugs over me. I called the Kavanaughs. Ruth answered, immediately sensing something was wrong. I explained the situation. She listened, without interrupting. What do you think I should do? I think you should do whatever lets you sleep at night. If you donate, you're giving him a second chance he might not deserve. If you don't, you're protecting yourself from someone who hurt you deeply. Both choices are valid. Donald got on the phone. That man failed you in every way a father can fail a child. You don't owe him anything. Not forgiveness, not a kidney, nothing. Don't let anyone guilt you into this. Their support made me cry. Even after all these years, I needed to hear that my anger was justified, that I didn't have to be the bigger person, that sometimes protecting yourself was the right choice. I went to therapy twice that week. My therapist asked me to imagine both scenarios, donating the kidney and not donating. Which one would I regret more? In the donation scenario, I saw my father living, maybe staying sober, maybe not, but alive, with a chance to build something better. I saw myself wondering if I'd been manipulated, if his sobriety was real, if I was stupid for believing people could change. In the non-donation scenario, I saw him dying, saw myself at his funeral, or maybe not attending at all, saw myself wondering if I could have saved him and chose not to, if that made me as bad as him. Neither scenario felt good. There's no right answer, my therapist said. This is about what you can live with, not what's fair or just. I took a week off work to think. The Kavanaughs had me over for dinner. Their biological children called to offer support. Other foster kids they'd helped reached out saying, whatever I decided, they supported me. On the 5th day, I called the transplant coordinator. I want to be tested as a potential donor. She sounded surprised but professional. Can I ask what changed your mind? I became a transplant surgeon because I believe everyone deserves a second chance, even people who don't deserve it. If I let my personal feelings override that belief, then I'm a hypocrite. The testing process took 2 weeks. Blood work, tissue typing, psychological evaluation, medical history review. Everything came back showing I was an excellent match. The transplant team asked if I wanted to meet with my father before surgery. I said no. They asked if I wanted him to know the kidney was coming from me. I said no. They explained they couldn't guarantee anonymity given the circumstances, but they'd do their best to keep my identity confidential through the surgery and immediate recovery. The surgery was scheduled for a Friday morning. The Kavanaughs came to the hospital at 5 a.m. to see me before I went in. Ruth held my hand and said she was proud of me for choosing compassion over anger. Donald said I was a better man than he'd ever be. Grace stopped by in her scrubs. She was working that day, but on a different floor. She said she'd check on me as soon as her shift allowed. My attending, Dr. Raymond Ossie, would be performing my nephrectomy while another team handled the recipient surgery. He asked one final time if I was sure. No, but I'm doing it anyway. He nodded. That's the definition of courage. Doing something terrifying because it's right. They put me under. And the next thing I knew, I was waking up in recovery with one less kidney and the knowledge that somewhere in this hospital, my father was receiving it. The pain was intense but manageable. The emotional weight was worse. I'd given part of my body to the man who'd traded me away. The man who'd chosen drugs over being a father. The man who'd let me live in a basement for 8 months. Ruth and Donald visited during recovery. They brought flowers and magazines and sat with me while I drifted in and out of consciousness. Grace stopped by after her shift. She said my father's surgery had gone well, that he was in ICU recovering. She asked how I felt. I said empty, like I'd given away something I couldn't get back. She held my hand and said what I did was extraordinary, and it was okay to have complicated feelings about it. 3 days post-op, my father's transplant coordinator asked if I was willing to see him. He was being moved out of ICU and had been asking about his donor. I said no. She said she understood, but wanted me to know he was doing well, the kidney was functioning properly, and his prognosis was good. I nodded and asked her to leave. On day 5, I was discharged. The Kavanaughs drove me to their house to recover. Ruth had made up my old room. Donald had stocked the kitchen with foods I could eat on my post-op diet. I spent 2 weeks at their house, healing physically while trying to process what I'd done. My father left me a voicemail on day 10. The hospital had told him his donor wished to remain anonymous, but he'd figured it out. He recognized my attending surgeon's name from the paperwork. He knew. Theo, I don't know what to say. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you. You gave me life when I took yours away. I'm so sorry. For all of it. Thank you doesn't feel like enough, but thank you. I deleted it without responding. When I was cleared to return to work 6 weeks later, I found out my father had been discharged 2 weeks prior. He was doing well, attending dialysis clinic for monitoring, taking his anti-rejection medications. He'd asked about me multiple times, wanted to meet, to thank me, to try to explain. I told the coordinator to stop passing along his messages. I donated the kidney because I believed in second chances, not because I wanted a relationship. 3 months post-transplant, he showed up at the hospital again. Security called me. I went down already angry. He looked better, healthier. The color had returned to his face. He was heavier, no longer the skeletal figure from before. I know you don't want to see me. I know I have no right to ask for anything else. But I need to say thank you in person. You already did. In a voicemail I deleted. Then I need to say it again. You saved my life. After everything I did, you saved me. Why? The question hung between us. Why had I done it? Because I'm a doctor. Because I believe in second chances even when people don't deserve them. Because I needed to prove I was better than you. He flinched. You are. You're everything I should have been and wasn't. Is that supposed to make me feel better? You think acknowledging your failures fixes anything? No, nothing fixes what I did. But you need to know that I've been sober for 6 years now. I have a job, an apartment, a sponsor. I go to meetings. I volunteer at rehab centers telling my story. I'm trying to be the person I should have been 20 years ago. Good for you. But that doesn't change what happened. You still traded me. You still chose drugs over being a father. I know, and I'll regret that every day until I die. But because of you, I have days to regret it. I have a future to try to do better. People were staring again. A doctor and a patient having an intense conversation in the hospital lobby. I need you to stop coming here. Stop calling. Stop trying to contact me. I gave you a kidney because it was the right thing to do medically. That doesn't mean I forgive you. That doesn't mean we have a relationship. I understand. But can I ask one thing? What? Can I write to you? Not expecting responses? Just letters letting you know how I'm doing? Showing you that your sacrifice meant something. Why would that matter to me? Because you saved me. You have a right to know if it was worth it. I wanted to say no. Wanted to tell him to leave me alone permanently. But some part of me, the part that had become a doctor to give people second chances, couldn't quite cut him off completely. 1 letter a month. That's it. If you show up here again, I'm getting a restraining order. He nodded. Thank you. For everything. He left, and I went back to work, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck emotionally. The first letter arrived 3 weeks later. Short, maybe 2 pages. He told me about his apartment, his job doing construction, his sponsor who'd been sober for 15 years. He said the kidney was working perfectly, that he felt better than he had in decades. He thanked me again and signed it simply David, my father's name, which I'd barely thought of in years. I almost threw it away unread, but Grace saw it and asked if I was okay. I told her about the agreement. She asked if I'd read it. I said no. She said that was my choice, but sometimes reading without responding was a way to maintain boundaries while still acknowledging someone's effort to change. I read it. It was strange seeing his handwriting, something I barely remembered. He wrote like someone who wasn't used to writing, awkward phrasing, and simple sentences, but it felt genuine. The second letter came a month later. He wrote about going to his grandson's birthday party. I had to read that line 3 times before it sank in. I had a half-sibling I'd never known about. He explained that he'd gotten someone pregnant 15 years ago, a woman who'd kept the baby but didn't want him involved given his addiction. Now that he was sober, she'd allowed supervised visits. He met his son, my half-brother, a kid named Owen who was just turning 14. He wrote about how Owen reminded him of me at that age, how seeing him made David realize everything he'd missed by being high. I put the letter away and tried not to think about the fact that my father had another kid he'd also failed. The letters continued monthly. I didn't respond to any of them, but I read everyone. He wrote about his job, his meetings, the people he sponsored in recovery. He wrote about Owen and the slow process of building a relationship with a son who barely knew him. He wrote about the physical therapy for his back, the adjustments to anti-rejection medications, the routine of his new life. He never asked for anything, never pressured me to respond, just sent updates like I'd requested. After 6 months of letters, Ruth asked if I'd thought about meeting with him. Why would I do that? Because he's showing up consistently. Because he's doing the work. Because maybe you need to see if his change is real. His change doesn't erase what he did? No, it doesn't. But holding on to anger hurts you more than it hurts him. I thought about that a lot. How much energy I spent being angry at my father. How that anger colored my interactions with patients who'd destroyed their own organs through addiction. How I sometimes saw him in them and had to work harder to maintain professional compassion. Year 2 of his sobriety brought a letter that was different. He wrote that Owen's mother had gotten sick. Breast cancer, aggressive, not responding well to treatment. She'd asked if he could take Owen full-time if something happened to her. He'd said yes, but he was terrified. He'd failed one son catastrophically. How could he be trusted with another? The vulnerability in that letter surprised me. This wasn't the manipulative addict I remembered. This was someone genuinely trying to figure out how to be a father while carrying the weight of past failures. Owen's mother died 4 months later. The next letter was written in shaky handwriting, clearly emotional. He had full custody of Owen, a 14-year-old kid who'd just lost his mother and barely knew his father. David was trying his best, but felt in over his head. Owen was angry, grieving, and acting out. David didn't know how to help him through something he'd never processed himself. For the first time, I felt something other than anger. I felt empathy for Owen, a kid in crisis with only a reformed addict as support. I broke my silence and wrote back. 1 page. I gave him the contact information for grief counselors who specialized in teens. I explained what trauma looked like in kids Owen's age. I suggested family therapy to build their relationship while processing loss. I didn't sign it, "Your son," or anything personal, just my name. His response came faster than usual. He thanked me for responding, said he'd reached out to the counselors immediately. He said it meant more than I could know that I'd broken my silence to help Owen. He asked if I'd ever consider meeting his brother. I didn't respond to that question, but I kept reading the letters. Over the next year, David wrote about therapy with Owen, about learning to be present for someone else's pain, about Owen's anger at his mother's death and David's absence, about slowly building trust through consistency and honesty. He wrote about teaching Owen construction skills on weekends, about helping with homework despite barely having finished school himself, about Owen making the soccer team and David attending every game, being the parent he'd never been for me. It was painful reading about him being a father to Owen, the father he'd never been to me. But it also showed me he'd changed in ways I didn't think were possible. 3 years after the transplant, David wrote that Owen had asked about me. He'd found old photos and wanted to know why David never talked about his older son. David had told him the truth, that he'd been an addict who'd failed me completely, that I'd saved his life despite having every reason not to, that I didn't want a relationship, and he didn't blame me. Owen had said he wanted to meet me someday, to thank me for saving his dad. The letter ended with David saying he understood if I never wanted to meet Owen, but that the option was there if I ever changed my mind. I sat with that letter for weeks. Owen was innocent in all this. He hadn't chosen to have David as a father any more than I had. He was a kid dealing with grief and trying to build a relationship with a man he barely knew. Grace asked if I'd thought about meeting them. I said it felt like a betrayal of my younger self, the kid who'd survived Ray's house. She said, maybe it wasn't about betraying past me. Maybe it was about giving present me closure. The Kavanaughs said whatever I decided, they supported me. Ruth said sometimes the people who hurt us most deserve to see who we became despite them. Donald said I didn't owe them anything, but that meeting Owen might help a kid who needed it. I thought about how many patients I'd seen whose families were fractured by addiction, how many deathbeds I'd stood beside where forgiveness came too late or not at all, how many people regretted things left unsaid. I wasn't ready to forgive my father, might never be. But maybe I could meet Owen. Maybe I could show a grieving kid that people could survive terrible circumstances and build good lives. I sent a letter saying I'd meet them. Coffee shop, public place, 1 hour. David's response was immediate, grateful, humble, promising it would be on my terms completely. The day of the meeting, I almost canceled 6 times. Grace talked me through my anxiety. Ruth called to remind me I was strong enough for this. Donald texted saying he was proud of me. I arrived early and sat in the back corner where I could see the door. They walked in right on time. David looked healthy, 4 years sober, working construction, taking care of a teenager. He'd put on weight. His face wasn't hollow anymore, and his eyes were clear. Owen was tall for 15, lanky in the way teenage boys are. He had David's features but softer, less marked by life. He looked nervous. They saw me and walked over. David extended his hand. I shook it, feeling surreal about the whole situation. Theo, this is Owen. Owen, this is your brother. Owen's handshake was firmer than I expected. Thank you for meeting us, and for, saving his life. You're welcome. We sat down. The silence was awkward until Owen started asking questions. What kind of doctor was I? Did I like it? Was it hard? I answered honestly, keeping things surface level. Owen talked about school, about soccer, about missing his mom, but being glad to know his dad. David mostly listened, occasionally adding details, but letting Owen lead the conversation. Watching them interact, I could see the work David had put in, the way he listened to Owen, the way he made space for Owen's feelings, the way he showed up consistently. After 45 minutes, Owen asked the question I'd been dreading. Do you think you could ever have a relationship with us? Like, not right now, but eventually? I looked at David. He met my eyes, and I saw genuine remorse there. Not manipulation, just a man who understood he'd destroyed something that might never be fixable. I don't know, I told Owen honestly. Your dad hurt me badly when I was your age. I've built a good life, but that doesn't erase what happened. I need to protect myself. I get that, but he's different now. He's a good dad. I know he messed up with you, but people can change, right? Out of the mouths of kids. Owen had no idea he was asking me to validate the entire reason I'd become a doctor. Yeah, people can change. It doesn't mean they're owed forgiveness, but they can change. We finished our coffee. Owen hugged me before leaving, quick and awkward. David shook my hand again and thanked me for giving them this chance. I watched them walk to David's truck, saw Owen talking animatedly while David listened. They drove away, and I sat there processing. That one meeting opened a door I'd kept locked for years. Owen started texting me occasionally. Just small things, photos from soccer games, questions about medical school, updates on his life. I responded sporadically, but didn't shut him down. He was a good kid trying to navigate an impossible situation. 6 months after our first meeting, Owen invited me to one of his games. I almost said no, but Grace convinced me to go. It's not about David, she said. It's about a kid who lost his mom and wants to build family connections. I went. Sat in the bleachers far from where David sat with other parents. Owen saw me and waved, looking genuinely happy I'd come. He played well, scored a goal, and after the game ran over to thank me for coming. David kept his distance, giving me space, but I saw him watching, saw the emotion on his face seeing both his sons in the same place. Over the next year, I went to more games, started responding to Owen's texts more regularly, let him visit the hospital once for a school project about careers in medicine. He was smart, asking good questions, genuinely interested. Watching David parent him was still painful, seeing him be the father he'd never been for me, but it also showed me change was possible, that people could break cycles if they worked hard enough. 4 years after the transplant, the Kavanaughs threw me a party for finishing my fellowship and becoming a full attending. They invited their whole extended foster family. Grace came, my colleagues came, and I invited Owen, who begged to bring David. I hesitated, but Ruth said it might be good closure, having everyone I loved and everyone who'd shaped me in one room. David came. He stayed on the periphery, talking quietly with other guests, not pushing into my space. But at one point, Donald approached him. I watched from across the room as they talked. Later, Donald told me what was said. He'd told David that he was the man who'd cleaned up my messes, who'd taught me to drive and filled out college applications and been there for every milestone. That David might be biologically my father, but Donald was my dad. That David had given up that right when he traded me to Ray. David had cried and agreed, said Donald was right, that he was grateful someone had been there for me, that he'd never try to take that role. The conversation felt important, a demarcation of boundaries that needed to be clear. David could be in my life peripherally, but he'd never be my father. That role was taken by someone who'd earned it. 5 years post-transplant, David got promoted to foreman at his construction company. He wrote me a letter saying he'd marked 5 years sober, that statistically he was unlikely to relapse now, that he'd become someone Owen could be proud of, that he hoped someday I'd see him as more than just the man who'd failed me. I wrote back for the first time in years. I told him I saw his efforts, saw him showing up for Owen, saw him building a life worth living, but that seeing it and forgiving him were different things, that I might never get there and he needed to accept that. He wrote back saying he understood, that my survival and success were more than he deserved, that he was grateful for whatever relationship I was willing to have. Owen graduated high school and got into college with a partial soccer scholarship. He invited me to graduation. I went and sat with the Kavanaughs, my real family. David sat on the other side of the auditorium with Owen's maternal grandparents. After the ceremony, Owen wanted a photo with all of us. I stood between Ruth and Donald while David stood on the end, separate but present. That photo sits on my desk now, a complicated family portrait. 7 years after the transplant, I got married. Met someone who understood my history and loved me anyway. Someone who saw my scars and didn't need me to be anything other than myself. Owen was invited to the wedding. David was not. He sent a card congratulating me, saying he understood why he wasn't invited, that he hoped I'd found the happiness I deserved. Owen told me David had cried reading the invitation that didn't include him, said he'd told Owen it was right, that some doors needed to stay closed. 10 years post-transplant, David wrote saying his kidney function remained perfect, that he'd been sober a decade, that Owen was thriving in college, that he'd never stopped being grateful for the second chance I'd given him. I wrote back saying I was glad he'd made something of it, that not everyone got that chance, that he'd better not waste it. We have a relationship now, not father-son, something else, something undefined. He comes to Owen's events. I come to Owen's events. We're civil. Sometimes we even talk about surface-level things, but the wound he caused never fully healed, can't fully heal. I'm a transplant surgeon because I believe everyone deserves a second chance. I gave my father a kidney because of that belief. But giving someone a second chance doesn't mean giving them back what they destroyed. It means giving them the opportunity to build something new. David built a relationship with Owen. He built sobriety. He built a life worth living. But he didn't get me back. He lost that right 20 years ago in Ray's basement. I built my own family. Ruth and Donald are my parents. Grace is my mentor. My wife is my partner. Owen is my brother in a way that transcends our shared biology. And somewhere in the margins of my life, David exists. Grateful, sober, changed, but never fully forgiven. Because some betrayals are too deep. Some wounds don't close. You can save someone's life and still never trust them again. That's the complicated truth I live with. I gave him a kidney. I didn't give him absolution. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.